Okay, so yesterday we spoke about the different measurements of the Torah, and some of these measurements are important to know with regard to halachas that are applicable. For example, eating matzah and maror on Pesach, and drinking a revius of wine, and for other mitzvahs as well. For example, washing, for a person to wash and recite the bracha on tilas yadayim. So there's numerous areas of halacha that are important that we're learning that are applicable. And another important point is that in order to recite an after blessing, a person needs to eat the food in a certain amount of time in order to be obligated in an after blessing. So this is different than the ability to recite an after blessing if you have a long meal. This is just in other words, there's laws about interruption, where if a person interrupted too long, then maybe they would not be able to say the grace after meal. But besides for that issue, you may not even be obligated in the first place to recite an after blessing if you didn't actually eat this amount of food in a certain amount of time. So for example, on Pesach night, let's say you are going to eat a kazayas of matzah, as is obligated. So you're going to eat, let's say, a half a matzah if you want to be extra. On the half a round matzah generally fulfills all opinions. So let's say you eat a half a round matzah, but you eat it you eat it very slowly, or maybe in 15 minutes. So you actually have not fulfilled your obligation, because that's not called eating. In other words, that's not that's like nibbling. You've snacked a little. You didn't actually eat a matzah. You snacked and nibbled a little, but you did not have an actual eating. And eating is a certain amount of food in a certain amount of time. That's called a real eating. And that not only would mean that you are not fulfilling the mitzvah of matzah, you are also not obligated to say the grace after meal. And what is that time period? That time period is called kedei achilas pras, the amount of time it takes to eat a half a loaf. And as I mentioned yesterday, that a half a loaf is either 3 eggs, or the size of 3 eggs, or the size of 4 eggs. I think I mixed up the opinions yesterday. I said the Rambam and Rashi, so I just want to correct that there's an opinion of the Rambam and the opinion of Rashi. The Rambam holds the 3 eggs, and Rashi holds the 4 eggs. And I think I said the opposite yesterday. And when I explained it, I said that there's a little like hint to a little code to figure out which one is which. So because the Rambam and Rashi both hold the opposite laws regarding the laws of Eruv, how many walls one needs. And so one is based on that symbol. If you want to use that code, one is based on spelling out the name of the of either Rashi, the way Rashi's name is Shloima, Rav Shloima Yitzchaki. So Shloima is 4 letters, and but on the other hand, his acronym is 3 letters, and the Rambam, his name is Moshe, 3 letters, but the acronym is the Rambam 4 letters. So basically, that was a little code to be able to remember the opinions that he holds in one place 3 and one place 4, each of them. But in any event, the amount of time that it takes to eat this achilas pras, there are different opinions. If you want to take it into practical halacha, there are different opinions. This actually also applies on Yom Kippur. If a person needs to eat, God forbid they're not well, and they need to eat on Yom Kippur, so the amount of time that's called an eating is this kedei achilas pras, this amount of time. So if you take these different opinions, first of all, between the Rambam and Rashi, that itself is going to be a difference of opinion how long it is, because if it's the amount of time to eat 3 eggs of bread or 4 eggs of bread, 4 eggs worth, in other words, a half a loaf of bread, that itself would be a difference in time. But then you have differences of somewhere between 3 minutes and 9 minutes. And of course, for Yom Kippur, we're going to be strict. And we're going to say that you should try to, on Yom Kippur, if a person needs to eat, but they don't need to eat a lot, and they can get away with eating small amounts here and small amounts there, then we would tell them you eat, you're not well, so you're allowed to eat, but eat only a certain amount, the size less than the size of a less than the size of a date, Kresevas Hagasa, a large date, within 9 minutes. So you got every 9 minutes you can eat, you could eat just less than that size. And regarding Pesach, we would tell you got to eat the matzah within 3 minutes or 4 minutes to be extra strict for the other direction. Again, for the strictness sometimes is the larger size of time, or the strictness could be a shorter size of time. For example, to fulfill a mitzvah, it would be being strict would be to fulfill the most extreme view would be the shortest time frame. To eat on Yom Kippur and spread it out so that's not considered an eating, it's considered more like a nibbling. So that we would spread it out to the more strict view would be the larger view, the 9 minutes. So that's what's done. And it does apply. There's people person who just gave birth, they tell them that they have to eat. They eat generally they divide it up and eat in very small amounts and spread it out. But it's these laws are applicable in halacha very much. And of course, the amount that a person has to eat is a kazayas in general for fulfilling the mitzvahs of maror, and for the biblical mitzvah of matzah. Nowadays, it's biblical according to the common view is that matzah is a biblical obligation. It's to eat a size of an olive and within that amount of time. And the obligation to wash and recite hamaitzi, to recite al natilas yadayim, is if you're going to eat the size of an egg. If you're not going to eat the size of an egg, which we're strict to say that it means double the size of a olive. And so that in order to recite the bracha al natilas yadayim for washing, you need to eat double the size of an olive, the size of an egg, in order to fulfill that, that in order to say a bracha on washing. Otherwise, you would wash without a bracha. So there's a lot of technical laws that are based on this Gemara, and this applies. You wouldn't bench if you ate bread and you spread it out over time. Then you would not say an after blessing. If you ate very small amounts of nibbled on your bread and you didn't eat a size of an olive of bread in 10 minutes, then you're not going to be obligated to say the grace after meal. Or if you ate less than the size of an olive completely, you're not going to be obligated in reciting the after blessing. Or the same thing applies not only to bread, but even to mezainis or shahakal, any other food item that you're eating. So these are very practical halachas. We did get into a little discussion yesterday, and Simone wanted to debate what we mentioned based on something she saw in a reference guide. But the simple understanding is that the way you measure an egg is through the displacement option, and you displace that amount, and they've calculated it into cubic centimeters, and they have calculated it. Now there is such a there is a lot of discussion about these measurements, because there is a way of calculating the size of an egg based on the size, what's called an etzba, a finger. And there is such a discussion in Gemara Psachim. And the problem that comes out is that they measured an egg based on the displacement, and they measured an egg based on using this measurement, and they found that it didn't work. It wasn't compatible. So it created a big uproar in the Jewish community among the great rabbis. So what do we do? What do we follow? And how do we answer this discrepancy? And this is there's an argument in the last generation, Rabbi the Chazon Ish and Reb Chaim Noah, and the Chazon Ish was known to be very strict, and Reb Chaim Noah, which is the accepted view, was Reb Chaim. It's interesting. He was a Lubavitcher, but he has his view was the accepted view. The Chazon Ish was like a leader of the ultra orthodox Litvaks, but his view was not fully accepted. He took a very extreme. He was always very extreme, and Reb Chaim Noah was more of a took the regular view or the more lenient view, and that's commonly the accepted view. Of course, some people try to be extra strict, and that's nice. They want to follow the other view, but these two rabbis, they weren't exactly arguing. They were really basing it on the previous rabbis who argued on this. And the previous rabbis who argued on it, the most famous one who took a very strict stance was the Noida B'Yehuda, who was also the Tzlach, the same person who wrote a book called the Tzlach and the Noida B'Yehuda. Anyway, I think his name was Rabbi Cheskel Landau. So he followed he tried to answer this discrepancy by saying that the eggs of those days were different than the eggs we have today, and therefore they were much bigger, and therefore the size we should follow, we should assume that it's double the size, and he took a very extreme approach, and the Chazon Ish follows that. So everyone calls it the Chazon Ish view. It's really based on this older argument, and the other view, I mean, there are other ways of answering this discrepancy, but ultimately, the common way of measuring, or the common, I would say this: the way they came to cubic centimeters of how to calculate is from the displacement. From the displacement, at least that's what it seems. And so ultimately, it's the displacement method is the way. Now, obviously, you're not going to go and do a displacement test and figure out your calculations, but you can calculate based on the books. The later books of halacha, they give you like how much lettuce do you need for maror. They have a certain size. Put your maror on this sheet, and you will know how much it has to be. Like an 8x10 sheet of that would be good enough for your maror and for your lettuce. And for the matzah, there are different opinions. If it's a half a matzah, a quarter of a matzah, a third of a matzah, but it also depends on the thickness of the matzah. But again, you're not going to be calculating it, but this is just for for the origin. If you want to know the origin of where they calculated the eggs from, the displacement method is the way they calculated volume, and that's how they came up with these measurements, and were able to figure out how much we need. Thank
you, Rabbi Smith, for going into it.
Yeah, you're welcome. So now I also should mention, Simone, that what you read there is not. It's not exact. It's not so. They didn't cover all grounds. You know what I mean? They didn't cover everything. They gave you little information, but they didn't They didn't give you the full picture. There's also different sizes of eggs. And but the thing is that the common beitza that the Gemara talks about is the beitza midbaris. So they might, it's very nice that there's one mention of the Yerushalmis and there's other, there's a few statements, but that's just sort of like they're showing off their knowledge that they know. You know what I mean? They should have just said that the Gemara talks about the Beitz of Midbaris, but they mentioned that there's a Yushalmis, and there's a third type of Tzipairis type of egg, and that is mentioned in the Gemara once. You know what I mean? But it's not the or maybe a few times, but it's not the common Beitza that we talk about. Okay, so in any event, let's get back to so what we were learning here was that each of these words in the pasuk is not coming to tell us the order. It's coming, according to this new view, according to Reb Chanan, it's not coming to tell us the order that you should do this first and that one later. It's coming to tell us that Israel is blessed with these 7 species that are used to calculate the measurements of the Torah. That's how Israel is blessed with these. And as I mentioned yesterday, he's not disagreeing that Israel is blessed with these delicious fruits, but he's saying the reason for the verse is the reason for the verse in mentioning each of them is to give honor to the fact that each of these is used for a measurement of the Torah. So I was thinking maybe that's the Reb Chanan and Reb Yosef or Reb Yitzchok, they're arguing. Maybe one is saying that we're praising Hashem for the gashmias of these fruits, and the other one seems to be saying we're praising Hashem for giving us these fruits that the entire Torah is based on for the ruchnias, the spiritual blessing. That's what it seems like. That he's saying that that Israel is blessed with these fruits and 7 species that Israel is that the whole Torah, the Torah is based on. These measurements are the Torah is based on. Anyway, just throwing you a little thought there, but each of these items, we said the reason why it mentions wheat is because the amount of time today achilas pras regarding the law of tuma, and that had to do with a person's clothing that they are wearing does not become tummy right away. Clothing that they are holding will become tummy right away when they enter a house that is tummy, that is menuga, that has tzoras in it, as this biblical leprosy. But the clothing that are on them, it doesn't automatically become impure, only if they wait there the amount of time of achilas pras. And how long did we say is achilas pras? Any time between like 3 minutes and 9 minutes. And then we said eating a half a loaf. What type of loaf? It has to be wheat loaf. That's eaten faster than a barley loaf. And mentioned that it had to be eaten when a certain way of leaning and eaten with some type of a condiment. And then we mentioned the purpose of the barley is to tell you the size of tumah for a bone of a deceased person. How big must the bone be, or a piece of the bone? It has to be the size of a sa'ira.
What's that?
Which is a kernel of a barley corn. And we said geffen is the size of a revius of wine for a nazir. And what we calculated there, interestingly enough, revius is normally a liquid measure, which is how much we normally use for kiddush and for the 4 kaises, for the arba kaises. Although there is one opinion that you're supposed to drink majority of the cup, which gets very problematic on Pesach if you have a very large cup and you want to follow that extra strict view that you have to drink the majority of the cup. You might get drunk before the end of the night. So you might want to be careful to not use such a large cup, but it should at least have a revius. The cup, it needs to have a revius. A revius is somewhere around 3 ounces as the smaller size, the bigger size. Again, this is going to be based on these two views that we mentioned earlier. If you want to follow the accepted view of Avram Chaim Ner, which is lenient, is like 3 ounces. The more strict view is like more than 5 ounces. So that's a revius. And so now you're supposed to drink at least the majority. It's best to drink the whole cup, but if you drink at least the majority of the revius, that's good enough. And according to one opinion, you have to drink the majority of the cup. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say they are so careful with measuring time of stuff and length and volume. What about one person can eat a whole loaf in 1 minute or 2 minutes, and another one will take him an hour? So how can they really limit you to 4 minutes?
Yeah, it seems like it's
10 minutes.
Listen, you can only do what you can do. And obviously Hashem expects, from us only what we can do. So you do as fast as you can if you have an issue. You know what I mean? You have to, if you're someone that eats very slow, so you try to eat a little faster.
If you have to watch your watch the whole minute,
doesn't mean it means you don't start talking. It means don't start talking and don't start reading some nice insight that you found in your Haggadah while you're noshing on the matzah. That's not the time to do that. But don't waste any time. Concentrate on eating and finishing that within a certain period of time. Okay. That shouldn't be an issue. But
otherwise, you don't.
You try. But again, there are lenient views. I'm sorry. What did you say? I'm sorry.
You can't enjoy the meal if you have to worry about the time all the time.
Just the matzah and the maror.
That's on Pesach.
Just the first piece. The first piece of the matzah.
The regular meal. What is it?
The same thing.
9 minutes?
The first. Just the first bite of bread, or somewhere in the meal, you have a bite of bread that's the size of an olive within a few minutes. But that doesn't mean the whole meal has to be that way.
Okay.
Yes, Susan.
Is it okay to use non-alcoholic beverages for Friday?
Non-alcoholic beverages for drinking We've spoken about using grape juice, which is not so simple because the grape juice now, if you squeeze your own grape juice,
I'm going to take the grapes, put them in my blender, and make a liquid.
Yeah, then for sure, no problem. But the common halacha is that grape juice is fine, so you don't have to do that if you don't want to. You could use the grape juice, but there are other opinions, right? So if you want to be extra careful, that's very nice to do it that way. Make sure your blender is kosher for Pesach. So that's important. Otherwise, better use the store-bought. And we mentioned that the problem with it, the reason why the store-bought is there is an option to be more strict than the store-bought is because the store-bought has some chemical or it's not able to ferment. That's the problem with it. And but the accepted, everyone seems to use grape juice. At least many families use grape juice, and at least for sure for the kids. And I don't know too many people who squeeze their own grape juice. Susan, you're going to be one of a kind to.
It's just that I prefer
make your own grape juice.
The flavor.
But that's very nice. It's very special. Yeah,
the flavor is way better if you make it that way.
That's great. So we're mentioning here that a Nazir who is not allowed to have any products from a vine, which means he can't have the skins of the grapes. And so if you take all those skins of the grapes and you drop it into a cup that has wine in it, and you use this displacement method, you will find out how much he will be he needs to eat in order to be subject to the punishment of transgressing having products of the vine, which he's not allowed to have. So if he eats those products from the vine, so that's how they measure it. And if the measurement is a revius of yayin, it's a revius of wine. And we said that if it would be water, you would actually be it would be a smaller amount because wine doesn't displace as easily as water does, because wine is a thicker liquid. So you need to put more skins of the or pits of the olive in order to reach that measurement of a revius. A revius means a quarter. And it's a quarter of a lug. That's what, when we speak about a revius of wine for Kiddush and for Pesach and so on, we talk about a revius. We mean a revius of a lug. A lug is a measurement, and a revius is a quarter of that measurement. And I mentioned that a revius is 1.5 eggs, and a lug is 6 eggs. So a revius is a quarter of a lug, because a lug is 6 eggs. So the size of 6 eggs, the volume. Okay, now te'ena, a fig, is kigregeres, and that's regarding Shabbos. Gregeres is a dried fig, and that is the measurement for carrying on Shabbos. And we said a pomegranate is used for kli'etz, is for a wooden. It says for a hole in a basket that is of a Baal Habayis, of a household owner, not a store. That if you have a store and you try to sell stuff with holes in it, you're not going to make too much money, because people don't want broken things. But if you have a container with a hole in it in your house, you might use it for items that are bigger than that hole. But once it has a hole the size of a pomegranate, then it's no longer considered a vessel, because it's considered hardly able to be used. And if it was tameh, it actually has now become tahor, it becomes pure. If it was impure, it becomes pure because it's not considered a vessel anymore. And that measurement is the size of a pomegranate. Now, this applies to wooden utensils, not to earthenware, because earthenware utensils are not, you're not going to keep it once it has a hole even smaller than a pomegranate. Now, then we said zayis, zeis shemen, which zayis is an olive. In the majority, you initially said all measurements are based on the olive. Then we said the majority of measurements in the Torah are based on olives, and we gave some examples. Rashi gives a few examples here of the olives, and I mentioned them yesterday. It's interesting that he doesn't mention there are others. There are a number of others. He mentions these that are prohibited. These are sins that are subject to the punishment of kares. Interesting why Rashi does that. He could have mentioned a number of others that are, that the laws of Kezias, maybe, for example, you have Gid Hanoshe, you have the mitzvah saseh, you have positive mitzvahs of eating matzah and maror and korban pesach, but Rashi gives these few examples. Okay, and he gives the example of eating chelev, dam, noiser, and pigul. Chelev is fats that are prohibited from the meat. There are certain fats that they cut off before we get any meat that you have that has a symbol, that has a kosher symbol on it. It means that they've cut off those fats that we're not allowed to eat, and they've salted it. The dam, that's another example of a kezias. Measurement of dam is kezias. Noiser is leftover food from the sacrifices, and pigul means food that was sacrifices that were slaughtered, or the blood was sprinkled with the wrong intention to eat it outside of the appropriate time that it's allowed to be eaten. And then the final thing was the devash, was date honey, or honey, dates that make honey, and that's applicable for the laws of eating on Yom Kippur. Now the Gemara says v'idach, and what does the other opinion do about how does he know these measurements? And the Gemara answers that these measurements, it doesn't say clearly in the Torah. It's it doesn't say it in this verse. It's a hint to these measurements. It's a nice code. It's a nice, so it's midrabanan. And the pasuk is only a asmachta. It's only something, smachta bialma. So it's only something to lean upon. It's only a nice hint. But bottom line is that we seem to have two opinions. If there is an obligation of the order of these verses, of these items, these 7 species, or not. And the Gemara continues with a little story here, and I'm just going to take an extra minute or two of our time, and let's do this next story to conclude conclude this this discussion of the Gemara. Rav Chisda and Rav Hamnuna have a yasvi b'suudasa. Rav Chisda and Rav Hamnuna were sitting together at a meal. Aisula kamayo tamri v'rimoini, and it was brought before them tamri, which is dates, and rimoini is pomegranates. Now, which one do you think you should recite the bracha on first? Tamri, the dates, or the rimoini, the pomegranates? Anyone?
Pomegranates,
Dates.
Pomegranates. Why?
because that's mentioned before dates.
It's mentioned before dates, right? Sounds like now Shaka Rav Hamnuna, and what did Rav Hamnuna do? He took Shaka, he took Baruch Hatmari. He recited the bracha on the dates, Bereisha, first, and he exempted the pomegranates. So Amar Le Rav Chisda said to him, like Spiro Leimar Lahada Amar Rav Yosef, Rav Yitzchok. You don't hold of what Rav Yosef and some say Rav Yitzchok said. Kalamuktam b'pasuk zeh kaidem lebracha. Whatever's earlier in this pasuk goes first for the bracha, and you should have recited the bracha on the pomegranates. Dates is the last word in the verse is dates, so the pomegranates should go first. Amar Le, he said to him, Zeh sheni la'aretz v'zeh chamishi la'aretz. This one is the second item to aretz, meaning the second time it says eretz in the verse, because it says eretz twice. It says eretz chita usa'ira v'gefen useina v'rimain eretz zeis shemen udvash. Now, if you count from the word eretz, the second eretz, what number is dvash? It says eretz zeis shemen, which is olives, and dvash and dates.
Second.
So it's the second to the word eretz. And if you look at the first eretz chitu sa'ira, v'gefen useina v'rimain. Where is the pomegranate rimain? It's fifth, because you have chita, wheat, barley, grapes, figs, and pomegranates. So it's fifth. So he says, you don't go by the beginning of the verse and say dates, that's the last one. You don't do that. You go by where it says eretz, and the word eretz, the second time, dates is really number 2, and eretz is fifth. Let's read it inside. Zeh sheni la'aretz, v'zeh chamishi la'aretz. This one is the second to eretz, the second eretz, and v'zeh chamishi la'aretz, and this is fifth to eretz, and that's how it works. Amar Le man yohiv lan nagra de parzelo. Who could give us feet of iron? In other words, if only I had feet of iron to go after you and hear such beautiful words, v'nash be'inach, and be able to be meshamesh you and serve you, be able to hear such. I would run after you to hear such beautiful insights, gems of wisdom that you share, because these are they're not automatically understood. This is a great gem that it follows the word eretz. Now, what's interesting is, and you may ask this, the verse says all of these 7 species. Now, let's say they're all equal, how should the Torah have worded it differently? Maybe they're all equal, and the Torah has to say one first. So how do we know that you go by this order? Maybe it's not meant to tell you the order. It's telling you they're all good produce. They're all equal. But I can't say all in the same word. The Torah can't write them all in the same word. So it says it has to pick an order.
So why is there a second eretz in the sentence? So from that you get a chiddush.
So Ezra has a brilliant answer. Thank you, Ezra. Now there is a Gemara like this. The Gemara says in Chagiga, it talks about Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es haaretz. It says in the beginning Hashem created the heavens and the earth. Which one was created first?
The heaven.
So, but maybe it has to say both. It has to say Shamayim and Eretz. It has to say one first. It has to say both. So pick Shamayim. How do you know that it means the heavens was created first? So the Gemara says because it says v'es, it says Eis Hashamayim or Eis Hashamayim, v'es haaretz. It separates with the word Eis, and therefore it teaches you that it's this is specific. It's telling you specifically this order, and otherwise it would just be putting them next to each other. Now, the same thing applies here. According to one commentary wants to explain this, that here where it says Eretz, the second word Eretz, the fact that it tells it to you a second time is actually telling you that this is not just saying words and you know they're all equal and you has to say one first, but it's specific. And it's so specific that that it says the word Eretz to tell you that whatever's closer even to the second Eretz actually comes first. And now the question is, what happens if you have an olive and a kernel of wheat? Which one comes first then? Or if you have a date and a kernel of barley? Or which one would you eat first? Because each of them are closer, the same distance from Eretz. Because the first Eretz, what's the first one? Wheat. The second Eretz, what's the first item? An olive. So which one comes first? Wheat or an olive? And then the second, and then or the second thing, or the second. Another option is if you have barley, which is second to the first Eretz, or you have dates, which is second to the second Eretz. This is Taisus' question. He says, nevertheless, Ben, what did you want to say?
I think it's the first part of the complete sentence.
So you want to go by the